I do know that he was
53-year-old Helen Norris says she has nothing to gain by her claim. She says she's simply telling the truth, that James Jordan couldn't have possibly been killed when investigators claim he was.
But you really do believe that you saw him in that store?
Yeah, on the 26th, on a Monday. I'm positive that was him.
And there's no doubt in your mind?
No doubt in my mind they was in that store.
Norris says she saw Jordan and his accused killers, Larry Demery and Daniel Green, together at this Brunswick County mini-mart where she was the morning clerk. Exactly 1 year later, Helen Norris no longer works at this convenience store, but she says despite the time that's gone by, her memory is clear, and she says she knows what she saw.
Because the time I saw him, that after they found the body and all, and they showed that he was missing, the time I saw him on TV, I didn't even know who he was. And I told my brother, I said, that guy had been in the store about 2 weeks ago. And my brother said, him? I said, yeah. I said, well, who is it anyway? He said, that's Michael Jordan's daddy.
A gag order preventing law enforcement officers from discussing the case remains in effect, but Norris says she has not been called by either side to testify. Some detectives have said she was mixed up on her dates. She says no way.
One of the FBI agents in Fayetteville took and said I was crazy. They got what they wanted. They don't want nothing else to interfere with their case. That's how I feel.
Norris says she'll be interested to see if her claims are brought up when the case goes to trial. Brian Moore, News 6, Wilmington.
Held like this here for a while.
Daniel Green disputed Thursday's testimony by former public defender Freda Bowman Black. Green says Black spent less than an hour with him preparing his defense. Green ended up pleading guilty in 1991 to assault with a deadly weapon with intent to kill. Now, he says it was a case of self-defense.
At first, when he fell, I didn't realize that he was hurt, you know, that bad. And so when I realized, I was just kind of, I guess, in shock for a second.
Anti-death penalty lawyers argued Friday that the case should have stayed in juvenile court and never been transferred to Superior Court. Green was 15 at the time. Judge Gregory Weeks seemed to agree with that opinion.
We know from the record before us that counsel did not know that it was erroneous at the time the finding was made, did not fulfill any obligation at all to see to it that any information considered by the district court judge was in fact accurate.
But the prosecutor says even if he can't use the conviction to support the death penalty, that he still has a case.
Well, in terms of the Jordan case, this is one of the aggravating circumstances that we're relying on for asking for the death penalty, that he's previously been convicted of a felony involving violence to another person. There are other aggravating factors which we've already gone on record as stating that exist in this case.
Defense lawyer Hugh Rogers says the statements were illegally obtained. Larry Demery had been questioned for 7 or 8 hours when he signed the statements, and Rogers says lawmen threatened Demery.
We felt like that the tactics used by the officers in this particular case warranted suppression regardless of the content of the statement.
In the statement, Demery says he dropped Daniel Green near James Jordan's car, and that a few minutes later, Green drove up to Demery's house in Jordan's Lexus with a dead man in the passenger seat.
You all have heard the statement that Larry Demery gave, and it does not in any way exonerate him from his, in my opinion, as far as his involvement.
Britt says the statement, in fact, proves that Demery and Green were lying in wait for their victim, one of the reasons Britt is seeking the death penalty. But Rogers says he may be able to generate sympathy for Demery after he plays tapes of the interrogation in which lawmen graphically describe the death sentence.
It has never been on us to prove he's innocent. That's not going to change, and the burden remains on them whether or not this statement comes into evidence or not. And the fact that it is coming in may or may not assist them in meeting their burden of proof.
Mr. Mayor, No defendant wants to stand up against things, particularly an audio portion of a tape that's got absolutely nothing to do with the crime at all, and the court ruled as such. We're gonna stay with the issues of this case. I'm certainly concerned that the lady is apparently having excruciating back pain, and that's really sad. And no, we don't want to lose her or any of the 12 jurors. On the other hand, we're perfectly comfortable with the alternates if one of them has to come and sit.
How do you feel about being removed from the jury?
Well, I'm flabbergasted.
Why is that?
Because, I mean, to my knowledge, there was no reason.
What do you think, can you think in your mind that you may have done something wrong?
Not that I know of. Not that I know of.
Well, disappointed, yes. Angry. I guess there's no reason to be. In a way, I am. In a sense, I'm not.
You didn't do anything wrong?
No, sir, I did not.
How does it make you feel, I guess, when somebody says, when the judge kicks you off saying that you violated his rules?
Well, I'm still in kind of shock about it, so I don't know really how I feel.
Well, I think I'm proving my points. I watched the reports last night on TV. You know, one of the important things was to establish the identity of the body and prove that that was James Jordan. Makes me feel that I'm doing my job in terms of having the two jurors say that yes, it was James Jordan, and yes, it was his car. One of the advantages of doing the hearing outside the presence of the jury, it gave him an opportunity to come in court and testify for the first time. I mean, if you've never been placed on a witness stand to testify, it can be a pretty unnerving situation.
He is.
He is? Why do you say that?
Because he is guilty.
Daniel Green does not want a mistrial based on Judge Gregory Weeks' conduct. Demery pleaded guilty to murder. Daniel Green does not want a mistrial based on Judge Gregory Weeks' conduct. Sullivan says she drove the red Lexus to a basketball court so Green could rob someone, but no one was. The judge himself raised the issue after two local newspapers described Weeks as law from the bench and of chuckling and showing expressions during testimony. One of offers no opinion in court or out, but he does talk about Monday's testimony. Demery pleaded guilty to murder in the case last year, but says Green pulled the trigger. Only Daniel Green may be able to dispute. Mitch Davis, News 6, Lumberton. Dolores Sullivan says she drove the red Lexus to a basketball court so Green could rob someone, but no one was there. Woodbury Bowen says
How you feeling?
Pretty good. How you doing?
Okay.
Something wrong with this bed.
Okay.
He came forward with the statements that he has given since that time. And that is that he saw, he and Daniel Green were out there to rob someone. This car came up. They decided to take the car, tie the person up, going to dump them off. The only thing that changes is he now puts himself present at the time James Jordan was murdered.
Certainly you have a right to ask a question to see if you can get a witness to give a different or inconsistent answer later on, but that has not occurred, and that's why Angus, I think, has persisted on in the third and fourth and fifth times asking the same questions, and he has not been able to trip Larry up.
Well, the critical bullet and the critical gun can't be matched. And what more can I say? And none of this is offered as any kind of excuse or anything of that nature. It is simply offered to understand the circumstances in which this young man found himself. And I'm sure some of the jurors can relate to those very same circumstances.
ever seen. First name, then I L, last name Green. Of the Green family, not green as in trees, but green as the money.
The prosecutor claims Daniel Green's love for money drove him to kill James Jordan in a robbery.
And I can comprehend, I can kill a man, bop, bop, 2 shots through the head, bro.
Green's defense says the rap lyrics have nothing to do with Jordan's murder, and the defense doesn't want the jury to see the tape.
Not because anybody's afraid of it, not because it damages us in a particular way, but because it really doesn't add anything.
Green is seen in the videotape wearing a wristwatch and a ring that Michael Jordan identified as gifts he'd given his father. But Judge Gregory Weeks sided with the defense, saying the rap was too prejudicial.
If the defendant testifies or during their case they offer matters that the video would rebut, then on rebuttal I can present the video.
Jurors saw a 5-minute clip of the tape without sound during the testimony of the agent in charge of the case for the State Bureau of Investigation. Friday should be the day the prosecution finally rests its case after SBI agent Kim Hefney faces cross-examination. He's the defense's last chance to prove the state botched this investigation. Mitch Davis, News 6, Lumberton.
Lord Juala, do you think the witnesses did a good job saying where you were that night? It was telling the truth.
And he would have known that Larry Demery left and that Larry Demery was in big trouble. And Larry Demery was his lifelong friend. And so consistent with his loyalty to Demery, he wouldn't have said that Demery left alone.
Today.
Mr. Hackney, as the lead investigator with the State Bureau of Investigation, you're also charged with
Larry, what did you say to the jailers?
Come on, Larry, what you tell him?
Come on, Larry, what did you tell him?
Well, it did an appropriate thing to bring him in, and over in Columbus County for various charges, there's some bad blood apparently between that individual towards Mr. Britt. And this may very well be his way of getting in a shot at Mr. Britt on a personal level, as well as fabricating what Larry Demery supposedly told him about his understanding of the plea arrangement.
Do you think they're playing?
Daniel has raised a concern, and the only way to practically preserve that for the record, it seems to me, is a video. Daniel has raised a concern, and the only way to practically preserve that for the record, it seems to me, is a video.
Headed into the courthouse for Demery's last day on the stand, saying Demery had lost his mind.
Without Demery saying that Mr. Jordan was sleeping, woke up, said something, and then was killed by Daniel Green.
Judge Gregory Weeks has run a tight ship during the James Jordan murder trial, but Daniel Green now accuses the judge of making expressions of amusement and disbelief during the defense's final witness. After Green's charge, his attorneys said they want to videotape the judge during the end of the trial.
Daniel has raised a concern. At 1:30. Larry Demery came back at a little before 5. All those intervening times, Daniel Green was in that den at K. When you've got a situation where the physical evidence is crying out that it didn't happen the way Demery says, you've got stainless steel witnesses like the folks over at Kay Hernandez's house.
What did you say to the jailer?
Come on, Larry.
Like I always said, glad to be alive. This is America.
While the jury deliberated, I talked to one person eager to hand down his own verdict.
I don't think he did it, I think he know more than what he said about, what really happened. I don't think he really did it. I don't think they are getting the whole issue, situation out.
We visited one restaurant that's really become popular since this whole trial began. And let's just say food was not the only hot thing on the menu.
We hear and what we read and what we see on TV, I believe that Daniel Green is guilty.
Meanwhile, one customer had a somewhat different opinion about the outcome of the trial.
I feel like with all my heart it's going to be a hung jury. It should have been 25 minutes top. The jury should have been back out with a verdict.
And the jury returned directly after lunch with a guilty verdict. Renata Clanton, News 6, Lumberton.
Daniel Green says he had nothing to do with the murder and robbery of James Jordan, but at Monday's charge conference, his attorneys gained very little ground.
I'm going to tell you, all of that stuff went over my head.
Green's defense met with the prosecutor and the judge to hammer out what the jury will be allowed to consider in deliberations. Jurors will not be allowed to consider any charges with less severe penalties against Green once they begin their deliberations. The judge ruled during the charge conference that there was no legal basis for it, so jurors will be forced to decide guilty or not guilty on the charge of first-degree murder, armed robbery, and conspiracy to commit armed robbery.
to submit lesser included offenses would be to invite the jury to compromise. And I don't want that. This is a first-degree murder case. That's the way it needs to be treated.
13 jurors are still on the panel. Only 12 will deliberate. Pat Locklear, a former juror, says if she was still on the panel, the defense would have to make a strong closing argument.
You're looking for things, and there is some pretty stiff evidence against the defendant, and I expected that to be countered pretty hard, but there was no defense.
The defense strategy was simple. 3 days of witnesses who say Daniel Green or Jordan's car were somewhere else during the murder. A simple gamble which may hold Daniel Green's life as its stakes. Mitch Davis, News 6, Lumberton.
How do you think the jury's going to react to what's on the tape?
Defense attorney Woodbury Bowen was first with closing arguments. Bowen talked to the jury with passion in his voice, appealing to their compassion and their doubts about the case. His main target, the state's key witness, Larry Demery. Demery, who claims he watched Daniel Green shoot and kill James Jordan.
Demery tried to shape his statements to fit what he was told was the other evidence in the case. Now, I'm not saying the officers did anything. I'm saying that Demery himself kept changing to try to make things fit.
Bowen was slammed by Judge Gregory Weeks for breaking courtroom rules. Bowen apologized to jurors at one point. He argued for almost 5 hours. Public Defender Angus Thompson, less than an hour. Thompson, too, appealing to the jury's compassion and trying to destroy Larry Demery's credibility. Jurors had been deliberating for only an hour yesterday when they first returned to the courtroom, asking to see a photograph of the highway where James Jordan was allegedly killed and pictures of Jordan's body after it was pulled from a South Carolina swamp. This morning, the panel asked for a list of evidence presented by each side and for the cellular phone records from James Jordan's red Lexus. The jurors are sifting through 7 weeks of evidence from the prosecution and only 3 days from the defense, but Daniel Green's lawyers are confident in their case.
After all, we've done our part. It's now their part to do. Our talking is over and theirs is just beginning.
The prosecutor is also confident his star witness, Larry Demery, turned state's evidence against Green and the minds of the jury.
This is a strong circumstantial evidence case, and then you put Larry Demery's testimony in it, which is consistent with that circumstantial evidence, and that's the strength of this case.
Yes, I'm going to get my son some.
Elizabeth Green was hopeful, even confident, just before the lunch break.
Of course I'm hopeful.
How's Daniel holding up?
Daniel's doing fine.
Jurors were back from lunch only 20 minutes when they returned with a decision. Daniel Green guilty of all charges. That came after little less than 5 hours of deliberations.
I think it tells us that they went through the evidence, resolved any questions that they may have had about it, and came to the conclusion that they did, that Daniel Green was guilty of killing James Jordan.
Green's defense put on only 3 weeks of evidence against 7 weeks from the prosecution. Their main case, witnesses who say Daniel Green was somewhere else when James Jordan was killed.
We all have our various jobs in this case, and I performed mine, and I have more to do, and so has Mr. Thompson. The DA performs his, and the jury has a very separate and distinct job to do. And I think what we mostly all try to do is to do our jobs and concentrate on our work and let the jury do its.
Daniel Green is back in the Robeson County Jail, convicted of murder, and now facing the possibility of a death sentence. The sentence will be decided by the same jury.
Lord, you all are you nervous this morning? I love you, Daniel. Hi. See you later. Hi, take care.
You all are? How you feeling today?
I don't know. I mean, I don't even, I'm not even sure, to be honest with you.
You want to testify, son?
Pretty much good with it.
How you feeling today?
I don't know. I mean, I don't even, I'm not even sure, to be honest.
You want to testify, son?
Pretty much good with it.
How you feeling today?
I don't know. I mean, I don't even, I'm not even sure, to be honest.
You want to testify, son?
Joseph and Dorothy Tedeschi say they were robbed by Daniel Green and Larry Demery at the Family Inn in Roland on July 3rd of 1993. That was about 3 weeks before James Jordan was killed. Green's defense wanted to keep the Tedeschis off the stand, so Judge Gregory Weeks listened to their story without jurors in the courtroom. The Tedeschis will be allowed to testify about the robbery that happened at this motel. The testimony of Dorothy Tedeschi, a woman who could be almost anyone's grandmother, is what the prosecution hopes tips the scales of justice against Daniel Green. When asked if she was sure Daniel Green robbed her, Dorothy Tedeschi pointed to Green and said, quote, "Look at that face. How can you forget that face?" unquote.
Her testimony is being offered to make the 4th of July robbery real in terms of the jury that there actually is a victim, because all the jury has heard from right so far is Larry Demery. And they heard from Clouis Demery. I can rely on the evidence that I've already presented, and that's what I'm going to do.
The Tedeschis are the only witnesses the prosecutor plans to call. The defense is not revealing its strategy, spending most of the day in closed-door meetings.
You'll see it soon enough. It will bear upon the mitigating factors, which will be urged by us to be submitted by the court to the jury to determine which should be the appropriate punishment for this defendant.
Daniel Green told reporters he wants to take the stand in this part of the trial, but he also says he doesn't know if it would do any good.
I don't know. I mean, I don't even, I'm not even sure, to be honest with you.
You want to testify?
The pattern of violent deaths in this case is unusual. You don't usually find 5 people murdered in 3 generations in any family. Thank goodness we don't have that.
What kind of effect does that have on a person?
It varies.
My husband's very quiet, unfeeling look. And that's how I remember. And you don't forget it. I mean, it wasn't a big...
Since his arrest 2.5 years ago, Daniel Green has changed his religion, changed his name, and changed his appearance. But he still looks the same to Dorothy Tedeschi. She told jurors she would never forget the face of the man who robbed her and her family outside a Roland motel July 4th, 1993.
Just stared at me with no unfeeling. Just stared at me in the eyes like a quiet, unfeeling look. And that's how I remember him.
The prosecutor used the Tedeschis' testimony to show jurors Green's criminal conduct warrants the death penalty.
The purpose in bringing them here was to make that robbery on July the 4th real in the minds of the jury. Only a jury can answer the question of how powerful it was. I think she was a very effective witness.
Green's former best friend, Larry Demery, has pleaded guilty to James Jordan's murder. Demery testified he and Green stalked motel parking lots and highways looking for tourists to rob. The Tedeschis were the first victims, James Jordan the last. Green says he isn't worried about the death sentence. His lawyers hope a criminal justice professor convinced jurors to let him live. Dr. Glenn Rohrer testified Green grew up in a family with a history of substance abuse, violence, and 5 murders over 3 generations.
In this case, what we tended to get out of that was that he just felt like life was short and you had to kind of go for it a little bit. He concluded he wasn't going to live till he was 21 years old. The pattern.
Oh, Joe, what's the difference? Sorry. You're welcome. My husband's been...
The pattern of violent deaths in this case is unusual. You don't.
There are not as many mitigating circumstances as I thought that they were going to propose. I mean, there are about 32 that are going to the jury. The 2 aggravating circumstances that I contended are going to the jury, and just a matter of how the jury's going to view the evidence and weigh it.
How do you feel today?
It's always good.
How do you feel today?
It's always good.
Judge, are you still going to allow carry for the verdict? Yeah. Okay.
Lord Allah, do you think the jury has made up its mind already? Which way do you think they're going?
I'm not going to make a guess now. I'm not going to make a prediction.
The unanimous recommendation of the jury is that the defendant, Daniel Andre Green, also known as Sadiq Alamin Salam U Allah, be sentenced to life in prison.
Daniel Green sat quietly, his mother crying, as Judge Gregory Weeks read the jury's verdict. But Green finally got his chance to speak to the jury after their deliberations.
I did not kill Mr. Jordan. I did not rob Mr. Jordan. I've never tried to kill anybody, try to hurt anybody except in self-defense.
Several jurors left the courthouse without stopping to speak with reporters, but those who did talk with us say deliberations got very heated. When it came down to sentencing, 2 jurors were for the death penalty, 10 against.
One of the issues is who was actually the trigger man. You know,
A lot of doubt.
Yes.
There was a lot of doubt. Is that?
I think there was a lot of doubt.
Jurors were promised a trial which would last only a month. All are glad it's now over after 12 weeks.
But I've enjoyed it. So I think the state done an excellent job. You know, maybe the verdict didn't go their way. I don't know that, but I think with the evidence was in hand, I think we've done a good job with it.
I wish that I could have a little control over what happens to Demery, because I feel he's guilty of murder also. And just because he testified and I believed him, I don't believe that he should get any less.
As a matter of law, based on the record, the testimony as you've taken judicial notice, it's simply not there. It should not go forward.
In that regard, page 139 of Tyson.
Said motion being made pursuant to Edmonds versus Florida, the citation to be provided.
I think that's a factual question based upon the holding.
Mr. Tyson basically reminded me of foreseeable. If it is foreseeable.
Defense lawyer Hugh Rogers says the statements were illegally obtained. Larry Demery had been questioned for 7 or 8 hours when he signed the statements, and Rogers says lawmen threatened Demery.
We felt like that the tactics used by the officers in this particular case warranted suppression regardless of the content of the statement.
In the statement, Demery says he dropped Daniel Green near James Jordan's car, and that a few minutes later, Green drove up to Demery's house in Jordan's Lexus with the dead man in the passenger seat.
You all have heard the statement that Larry Demery gave, and it does not in any way exonerate him from his, in my opinion, as far as his involvement.
Britt says the statement, in fact, proves that Demery and Green were lying in wait for their victim, one of the reasons Britt is seeking the death penalty. But Rogers says he may be able to generate sympathy for Demery after he plays tapes of the interrogation in which lawmen graphically describe the death sentence.
It has never been on us to prove he's innocent. That's not going to change, and the burden remains on them whether or not this statement comes into evidence or not. And the fact that it is coming in may or may not assist them in meeting their burden of proof.
The jury found you guilty of first-degree murder yesterday, yet you believed they were going to find you not guilty. Why is that?
Well, first of all, because I wasn't guilty, and I'm not guilty.
And second of all, because I believe that our evidence proved that I wasn't guilty.
All right, you never did take the witness stand, so I'm going to ask you something now that you never answered in court. Did you or did you not kill James Jordan?
No, ma'am, I did not kill Mr. Jordan, and I've never killed anybody, and I never tried to kill anybody.
All right, but it would stand to reason to some people that you were driving his car, you used his cell phone, you had on the championship ring.
No, ma'am, I did not have the championship ring on. The ring I had on was the All-Star ring and the watch. I did not have the glasses. You could look at the picture of Mr. Jordan that was taken, and you can see that he had shades on. And as far as the championship ring, you can compare the championship ring to the picture of the gold ring I had on, and you can see that the gold ring I had on was a class ring, and that was the same ring that I had on the night those pictures were taken
okay,
at
but you're
Mr.
saying
Hernandez's
it's the
house.
All-Star ring of Michael Jordan's?
Excuse me?
You're saying it is the All-Star ring of Michael Jordan's?
I guess now. I don't know who the ring belonged to, but it was an All-Star ring.
Let's just stick with the car then. You were in his car, James Jordan's car, so it would stand to reason that you were perhaps the last person to see him alive.
Well, no, ma'am, I don't think so. I mean, there were other people that were in the car. I mean, there were several people that were in the car.
Okay, if you're saying you didn't kill James Jordan, then who do you think did?
I would have to say, with the way everything has turned out, I would have to say that Larry had to kill him. Because if he didn't, then he wouldn't have pleaded guilty and he wouldn't have testified against me.
Are you talking about Larry Demery? Tell me how you're feeling about Larry Demery right now.
I have absolutely no feelings at him about about him at all. I wish peace on him just like I wish peace on everybody else. And I know that he has to live with his conscience, and his conscience will deal with him better than anyone or anything else can.
You all were good friends even up until the point that you were in James Jordan's car. What happened?
Johnson Britt, Hugh Rogers, John Wisher Campbell.
All right, Monday is sentencing day. You could get life or you could be sentenced to die. What are you thinking about right now?
Well, I'm at peace with myself. I mean, I have peace of mind. I have a clear conscience. And, of course, my heart is heavy because, I've just been convicted of something, again, that I wasn't guilty of. I mean, this is the second time that this has happened to me, and the odds of that are very slim. But it's not really it's not something I'm worrying about because I feel that everything that happens, is the will of God, and that's the way that I'm looking at it.
I appreciate the interview, and we will see what happens on Monday.
All right. Can I say one more thing, please?
Sure.
I want to just thank everybody that has supported me and people that still are supporting me because there's still a lot of support out there, even with the verdict.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.